Hey guys, how you going? This is BillyEatWorld again, and today we're going to take a look at World War II shooters, which, as you might know, are making a bit of a comeback at the moment. For example, Call of Duty World War II came out a few months ago. We've seen a number of reboots of the WOLFENSTEIN series in recent years, and there's even now rumours that Battlefield might even go back to World War II as well. And so if you're over the age of 20, then like me, you're probably pretty pumped about this because you probably grew up in the original golden age of World War II shooters. But for those of you who aren't old enough to remember, well, you're probably wondering what all the fuss is about. And so this video is a crash course in the 5 games that started it all. But anyway, to kick off, the first game on this list is the 2001 reboot of the original World War II shooter franchise, Return to Castle Wolfenstein. And even though it might not be the most well-remembered game you'll see in this video, it's definitely one of the most important because it was the end of an era and the start of a new one. Being that it was a reboot of what was already a legendary franchise, it didn't really have a choice but to give a nod to the previous games in the series from the early 90s. And so although it does look very similar to some of the other games in this video, as far as gameplay goes, it's pretty old school, similar to games like Doom or Quake. The other interesting point to make about this game is that because it was on the cusp of the FPS generations, it never really entirely attempted to be authentic. And so just like the original Wolfenstein games, it's set in an alternate, almost science fiction universe, complete with futuristic weapons and enemies. Not just that, just like in the previous games, you play as a lone soldier with almost superhuman abilities that can carry just about every weapon known to man, which isn't necessarily a bad thing if you like games like that. It's just that if you're into realism, well, it doesn't really compare to a lot of the other games on this list. Now, speaking of realism, well, coming in next is a franchise that absolutely can't be left out of any list of World War II games, Medal of Honor. And that's because it was the brainchild of Steven Spielberg, who shortly after Saving Private Ryan was looking to create a game with a similar theme. The reason this is important is because unlike Return to Wolfenstein, Medal of Honor was a franchise created with realism in mind to pay respect to the soldiers who fought. And I think for many people, myself included, even though it wasn't the first game in the category, it was the game that cemented the idea of what a World War II shooter should be like. Before we go too much further though, I should point out that the game that you can see in this video isn't actually the original Medal of Honor, which came out on the PS1 back in '99. In fact, it's actually the first one to be released on the PC, Medal of Honor Allied Assault, which is similar in a lot of ways to what console players would know as Medal of Honor Frontline. And as you can see, it's actually quite impressive to look at, even though it actually runs on the same engine as Return to Castle Wolfenstein. But in saying that though, just like the previous game, it also lacks quite a few features that we've come to expect in modern FPS games, which we'll talk about later on in this video. Now obviously the next game on this list, BF 1942, needs no introduction on this channel, but it's interesting in this video to put it right next to Medal of Honor, a franchise it'd be intimately linked with in future generations. Because unlike the previous games I've already covered in this video, when it came out in 2002, this game completely blew the boundaries of the FPS genre. Like I've talked about in previous videos, BF 1942 was one of the original sandbox first-person shooters based around combined arms battles rather than just infantry combat. And so you can imagine what it would have felt like back in the day to fire up this game and jump into a tank or a plane for the first time. Graphically though, I've got to admit it wasn't the most attractive shooter game on the market at the time, and its sound design definitely had a lot to be desired. But none of that really mattered because it was the sheer size of the maps and a much greater focus on objective-based gameplay in multiplayer that was what really set it apart. It was also one of the first shooter games that I can remember to introduce the concept of kits and the whole idea that you would need to work as a team to be successful, which for me I think is still the key concept that survives in modern Battlefield games, and it's something that countless other franchises have tried to emulate over the years. Now coming in next, just like BF 1942, the next game on this list, Call of Duty, also needs no introduction because it created easily one of the most successful shooter franchises ever made. And I think what's most interesting about its rise to fame is that Call of Duty didn't become successful by doing things that hadn't been done before. It got there by refining what had already been working in other games. For example, just like Return to Castle Wolfenstein, Medal of Honor Allied Assault, and countless other games at the time, Call of Duty runs on the same id Tech 3 engine. But even so, in my opinion, it looks and sounds way better. It feels a hell of a lot smoother, and most importantly, it does a much better job of capturing the authentic World War II experience. One of the main things I think Call of Duty improved on, though, was that unlike most other shooter games at the time, in single player you play as a member of a squad. And even though these squad members weren't actual human players, in general the AI was a vast improvement on most games we'd seen prior to that, being able to, for example, throw grenades and make use of cover. Also, I should point out that single player wasn't the only thing the original Call of Duty refined. Its multiplayer, even though it wasn't unique, was much more refined and streamlined than most other shooter games. And I mean to the extent that even though the more modern COD games in the series probably do look a lot better, the core experience is still very similar because it was already pretty much as good as it could get back then. But finally, the last game on this list, and probably my personal favourite, is one of the very first attempts at a tactical World War II shooter, Brothers in Arms' Road to Hill 30. And when I say tactical, well, I mean it shouldn't be confused with games like Arma 3, but it is tactical in the sense that the focus of this game isn't just on the gunplay alone. To begin with, the weapons in Road to Hill 30 have significantly more recoil than any of the other games I've mentioned already on this list, and aim down sights seriously limits your field of view. And not just that, even if you can see someone, the weapon sway and spread pattern makes it hard to hit anything anyway, especially if someone is shooting back at you. Another important feature in this game is that in the campaign you actually lead a squad of soldiers that, unlike in Call of Duty, you can actually control in-game. And sure, you may not be able to individually control units like you can in Arma, but you can split up the squad into two parts that can move independently to support each other. Just like it would have actually happened in World War II, you can use these parts of your squad to suppress an enemy, while the other part of your squad can flank around and take them out. And so even though this might not be everyone's cup of tea, much more so than any other game on this list, Hill 30 really tries to simulate the World War II squad experience rather than just the individual combat on its own. But anyway guys, I guess that just about wraps up this video, so hopefully now you've got a good idea of how World War II games evolved back in the day. And hopefully in these clips you can see some of the features we now know and love in modern shooter games, and some that have been phased out over time. Before you go though, make sure you let me know what your favourite game on this list is, and maybe which of them you'd like to see reimagined in the future. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, until next time, see you later and have a good one.